September 1944, a single Marine corporal stood before a court-martial board at Camp Pendleton, facing charges of wasting ammunition and defying direct orders. His crime? Shooting at rain gutters instead of targets. 6 weeks later, that same Marine would save 43 American lives in the span of 14 seconds using a technique so unorthodox that Japanese intelligence officers would spend months trying to understand how their best snipers died from bullets that seemingly curved through the jungle. This is the story of the shot that military academies said was impossible until it wasn't. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, November 7th, 1942. 05:47 hours. The jungle smelled of rot and copper. Corporal James "Jimmy" Dalton pressed his face into the mud, listening to the flies feast on Private Martinez's body 15 feet to his left. Martinez had been the fourth man that week. The sniper had taken him at dawn. One shot through the eye from somewhere in the canopy that intelligence estimated at 400 to 600 yards northeast. The Marine Corps had lost 27 men to Japanese snipers in this sector alone. The pattern was mathematically predictable and tactically unsolvable. Jimmy was 23 years old, born in a town called Millbrook in upstate New York, where his father ran a hardware store and his grandfather had been a competitive marksman. Before the war, Jimmy had spent weekends shooting competitions across the Northeast, winning modest prizes and developing a reputation for unorthodox thinking. His service record showed an expert marksman rating, but also 3 disciplinary actions for creative interpretation of firing range protocols. He was exactly the kind of Marine that career officers distrusted and combat officers secretly valued. The problem was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. Japanese snipers, trained in the forests of Hokkaido and equipped with excellent optics, had perfected jungle warfare to a science that American doctrine couldn't counter. They positioned themselves in the dense canopy at extreme range, invisible in the layered vegetation, and picked off American troops with methodical precision. Standard counter-sniper tactics failed completely. American snipers couldn't spot targets through the jungle density. Artillery was ineffective against dispersed, elevated positions. Sending patrols meant more casualties. The mathematical reality was brutal. For every Japanese sniper identified and eliminated, 28 American soldiers died in the process. Lieutenant Chen, the battalion intelligence officer from San Francisco, who'd studied engineering at Berkeley before the war, had presented the data during the previous night's briefing. The numbers were irrefutable. Enemy sniper activity had increased by 340% in 6 weeks. American casualties per engagement had risen from 3.2 to 8.7. Time to elimination averaged 43 hours. Chen's conclusion was delivered with the clinical precision of someone who understood exactly how bad the situation had become. Gentlemen, we are losing this war of attrition. Our conventional methods are insufficient. We need innovation, and we need it immediately. Jimmy had listened to that briefing while cleaning his rifle in the corner of the command tent, and something clicked in his mind. A memory from childhood, a rainy afternoon in Millbrook, his grandfather teaching him about angles and physics while water streamed off their farmhouse gutters. That night, while other Marines tried to sleep through the fear, Jimmy sketched diagrams in his field notebook using a pencil stub and the dim light of a shielded lantern. The concept was theoretically simple, but practically insane. Instead of attempting direct line-of-sight shots through impossible jungle density, what if you could use the environment itself as a weapon? Rain gutters, metal roof edges, vehicle frames, anything that could redirect a bullet's trajectory through calculated ricochet. The physics were complex, but not impossible. Angle of incidence equals angle of reflection, adjusted for bullet velocity, surface composition, and atmospheric conditions. His grandfather had explained it while demonstrating trick shots at family gatherings, bouncing 22 rounds off metal plates to hit targets around corners. The old man had called it geometry with consequences. The next morning, Jimmy approached Lieutenant Chen with his sketches. The young officer examined the diagrams with the careful attention of someone trained to evaluate engineering problems, not dismiss them reflexively. "Corporal Dalton," Chen said slowly, "this is either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both." He paused, looking at casualty reports stacked on his field desk. "But we're running out of conventional options. I'll give you 3 days to develop a proof of concept. If it works, we implement immediately. If it doesn't, we never speak of this again." The battalion commander, Colonel Harrison, a West Point graduate with 22 years of service and deep skepticism toward anything that deviated from field manuals, was less diplomatic when he discovered the unauthorized experiments. "You want to shoot at what?" he demanded, his face reddening in the oppressive jungle heat. "Corporal, we are fighting the Japanese Empire, not performing carnival tricks. This is a waste of ammunition, time, and my rapidly diminishing patience." But Lieutenant Chen stood his ground, presenting the mathematics with calm precision. "Sir, conventional methods have a 91% failure rate. Corporal Dalton's approach offers a theoretical solution to an unsolvable tactical problem. 3 days of testing represents negligible resource investment against potential force multiplication. The risk-reward calculation favors experimentation." Colonel Harrison stared at both of them for 10 long seconds, then jabbed a finger toward Jimmy. "3 days, Corporal. Then I want this nonsense terminated and forgotten." Jimmy spent 72 hours in a makeshift range behind the supply depot, requisitioning damaged equipment and constructing test scenarios. He calculated angles using a battered protractor and field manual pages, adjusted for humidity and temperature, and fired hundreds of rounds at metal surfaces positioned at varying distances and angles. Other Marines watched with mixtures of curiosity and derision. "Dalton's lost it," someone muttered. "Shell shock got another one." But slowly, impossibly, the technique began working. By day 3, Jimmy could consistently hit targets at 40 yards by bouncing rounds off a salvaged Jeep hood positioned at 32 degrees. The physics were proving sound. The question now was whether it could scale to combat distances and jungle conditions, and whether anyone would trust him enough to try it when lives depended on the outcome. Guadalcanal Forward Operating Base, November 11th, 1942. The rain came down in sheets, turning the jungle into a grey-green hell of mud and misery. Jimmy worked under a tarp stretched between palm trees, surrounded by equipment that looked like a junkyard explosion. Sections of corrugated metal roofing salvaged from destroyed buildings, vehicle panels, ammunition crates reinforced with steel bands, and a collection of measurement tools that included a borrowed surveyor's transit, a carpenter's level, and 3 different types of protractors. The temperature hovered at 94 degrees, with humidity approaching saturation. Sweat and rainwater made everything slippery. The challenge was brutal in its complexity. Laboratory conditions were one thing. Combat implementation was entirely different. Jungle warfare meant constantly shifting variables. Vegetation density affecting bullet trajectory. Monsoon rains altering surface friction. Temperature fluctuations changing metal expansion rates. And the fundamental problem that you were attempting precision ricochet geometry while someone was actively trying to kill you. The margin for error was microscopic. A 2-degree miscalculation meant the difference between a kill shot and a wasted round that revealed your position to an enemy who would immediately adjust and eliminate you. Material science became unexpectedly critical. Different metals produced different ricochet characteristics. Galvanized steel roofing, common in Pacific theater structures, offered excellent surface consistency but required specific angle calculations. Aluminum from aircraft panels was lighter and easier to position, but more susceptible to environmental deformation. Vehicle armor plating provided superior durability but limited angle flexibility. Jimmy tested everything methodically, maintaining detailed notes in a field journal that became increasingly water-damaged and illegible, forcing him to rewrite critical data onto canvas tarp material using indelible pencil. Sergeant O'Brien from Pittsburgh, a career Marine with 17 years of service and a face that looked like weathered leather, volunteered to assist after watching Jimmy work through the third consecutive night without sleep. "Kid," he said, "I've seen a lot of crazy shit in this war, but watching you trying to teach bullets how to turn corners might be the craziest. That said, if you pull this off, you'll save more lives than any 10 conventional snipers. So what do you need?" What Jimmy needed was field testing under realistic conditions, which meant convincing command to authorize live-fire exercises using actual enemy positions as targets. Colonel Harrison, predictably, refused. "Absolutely not. I will not risk men's lives on experimental carnival tricks. Dalton's 3 days are over. Shut this operation down." But the mathematical reality intervened. November 12th brought 3 more sniper casualties, including a medic killed while treating wounded. November 13th added 4 more. The Japanese had refined their tactics, now operating in coordinated pairs that created lethal crossfire zones impossible to navigate safely. Battalion casualties exceeded sustainable replacement rates. Medical supplies dwindled, treating wounded. Morale deteriorated. The soldiers realized that leaving cover meant probable death from an enemy they couldn't see or fight effectively. Lieutenant Chen compiled casualty data into a presentation delivered directly to Colonel Harrison during the evening briefing. The numbers were devastating. 47 confirmed sniper kills in 19 days, average elimination time of 51.3 hours per enemy sniper, resource expenditure of 1,847 rounds, and 340 man-hours per successful counter-operation. "Sir," Chen concluded, "we are statistically losing this engagement. Corporal Dalton's method represents our only untested tactical option. I formally request authorization for limited combat trial." Colonel Harrison sat in silence, staring at casualty reports that represented individual soldiers under his command. Young men from Iowa and Texas and California who had trusted him to bring them home. Finally, he spoke. "One shot, Corporal Dalton. One combat opportunity. If it works, we implement immediately. If it fails, you return to standard duties and we never mention this again. Is that understood?" The opportunity came 36 hours later. November 15th, 06:23 hours. A Japanese sniper, identified by the distinctive crack of an Arisaka Type 97 rifle, had positioned himself approximately 580 yards northeast of 2nd Platoon's forward position, elevated in dense canopy. Standard counter-sniper protocols had failed for 6 hours. 2 Marines were already wounded. 3rd Platoon couldn't advance without crossing the kill zone. The entire offensive had stalled. Jimmy assembled his equipment with hands that trembled despite his best efforts at control. A corrugated steel panel, 3 feet by 4 feet, salvaged from a destroyed supply shed. A portable frame he'd constructed from bamboo poles and wire. His Springfield M1903A4 rifle with customized calculations etched into the stock. A hand-drawn chart showing angle calculations for ranges from 400 to 800 yards, and Sergeant O'Brien, who insisted on accompanying him with the simple statement, "If this works, someone needs to witness it. If it doesn't, someone needs to drag your body back." They moved forward under covering fire, crawling through mud and vegetation for 47 minutes to reach a position that offered clear sightlines to a metal-roofed storage structure approximately 187 yards northeast, which itself was positioned at a calculated geometric relationship to the sniper's estimated location. Jimmy set up the steel panel at 38 degrees relative to the target structure, confirmed elevation using the liberated surveyor's transit, adjusted for crosswind by wetting his finger and estimating at 4 miles per hour from the southwest, and loaded a single round. The mathematics in his head were frantic. Bullet velocity 2,600 feet per second, distance to primary ricochet surface 187 yards requiring 0. 6 seconds flight time, angle of incidence 38 degrees, producing reflection angle of 37 degrees after accounting for bullet deformation, secondary trajectory toward target area requiring additional 1.1 seconds, total flight time 7 seconds with gravity drop compensation of 14 inches. Target movement probability low because sniper doctrine favored stationary positions after successful kills. Wind deflection minimal at current velocity. Probability of success estimated at 37%. Probability of revealing position and drawing return fire estimated at 93%. Sergeant O'Brien whispered, "You sure about this, kid?" Jimmy wasn't sure about anything, except that men were dying and traditional methods had failed completely. He exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and fired. Japanese Forward Intelligence Post, Guadalcanal, November 15, 1942, 06:39 hours. Captain Takeshi Yamamoto, Imperial Japanese Army intelligence officer and graduate of Tokyo Imperial University, stared at the field report with growing confusion that bordered on professional humiliation. Sergeant Tanaka, one of their most accomplished snipers with 43 confirmed kills and 5 years of combat experience, had died instantly from a gunshot wound that trajectory analysis indicated had come from a geometrically impossible angle. The bullet had struck from the northeast at approximately 37 degrees elevation, yet no American positions existed in that sector. Observation posts reported no muzzle flash, no sniper team, no indication of enemy presence anywhere consistent with the wound pattern. "This is not possible," Yamamoto said aloud in Japanese, his voice tight with frustration. He had spent 6 years studying Western military doctrine, convinced himself that American tactics were predictable and inferior, built his entire career on the assumption that Japanese training produced fundamentally superior soldiers. The math didn't lie, but the math made no sense. How could a bullet arrive from a direction where no shooter existed? The implications were immediately troubling. If Americans had developed technology or tactics that allowed shots from impossible angles, then Japanese positional doctrine, the entire strategic framework of elevated concealed sniper operations, was suddenly vulnerable in ways that standard training couldn't counter. But Yamamoto's colleagues dismissed his concerns. American propaganda, they insisted. Tanaka was killed by conventional fire, and battlefield chaos created confusion. Do not complicate simple events with impossible theories. 2 days later, the impossible happened again. November 17th, Corporal Hayashi, another elite sniper, positioned 612 yards from American lines in a location intelligence had assessed as completely secure, died from a bullet that had apparently traveled through solid jungle canopy without disturbing vegetation. The wound pattern showed entry from an angle that required the shooter to be suspended 40 feet above ground in a sector Americans hadn't penetrated. Field investigators found no evidence of aerial operations, no parachutist deployment, no explanation whatsoever. Lieutenant Suzuki from the Field Intelligence Unit conducted personal investigation, measuring angles, documenting wind conditions, attempting to reconstruct bullet trajectory using standard ballistic analysis. His conclusion, delivered with visible reluctance, was professionally devastating. "Sir, I cannot explain this through conventional methodology. Either Americans have developed technology we do not understand, or we are facing tactics that violate fundamental principles of military doctrine." What they were actually facing was geometry. Jimmy Dalton had refined his technique through 8 successful eliminations in 12 days, each shot calculated using increasingly sophisticated environmental analysis. He'd discovered that monsoon rain actually improved ricochet consistency by creating uniform surface conditions. He'd learned to compensate for jungle humidity's effect on bullet velocity. He'd developed rapid calculation shortcuts that reduced setup time from 47 minutes to under 12. Most importantly, he'd trained 3 other Marines in the basic principles, creating a small counter-sniper unit that operated with devastating efficiency. The tactical results were immediate and quantifiable. American casualties from sniper fire dropped by 73% in 3 weeks. Japanese sniper effectiveness decreased as operators became psychologically impacted by unpredictable threat vectors. Combat patrols could advance with reduced casualties. Supply lines became more secure. The entire operational tempo shifted because one soldier had refused to accept that impossible meant impossible forever. But the Japanese military hierarchy remained trapped in doctrinal rigidity. When Captain Yamamoto compiled comprehensive analysis documenting the pattern, 17 sniper deaths from geometrically anomalous trajectories, all occurring after American positions had been under extended sniper pressure, all involving bullets that had apparently violated physics. His superiors classified the report as speculative and potentially damaging to morale. They couldn't accept that American innovation had outpaced Japanese training, that improvisation had defeated doctrine, that a corporal from upstate New York had solved a problem that their military academies insisted was unsolvable. November 28, 1942. The confrontation Jimmy had been avoiding finally arrived. 3 Japanese snipers, working in coordinated formation, had pinned down an entire platoon for 9 hours. Standard counter-sniper operations had failed. Artillery support was unavailable due to proximity to friendly forces. Casualties were mounting. Command authorized Jimmy to attempt simultaneous elimination, a theoretical possibility he'd calculated but never tested under combat conditions. The setup required 40 minutes and involved positioning 3 separate Ricochet surfaces at precisely calculated angles, coordinating with 2 other Marines trained in his technique, and executing synchronized fire within a 2-second window to prevent surviving snipers from relocating. The distances ranged from 520 to 617 yards. The angles required bullets to bounce off surfaces, including a destroyed Jeep, a section of warehouse roofing, and a palm tree with a metal stake driven at a calculated height. The probability of success, by Jimmy's estimation, was 19%. The probability of revealing their positions and drawing concentrated return fire was 98%. They fired simultaneously at 15 and 47 hours. 3 shots, 3 ricochets, 3 targets eliminated within 3 seconds, at ranges exceeding 600 yards, using a technique that military doctrine insisted was impossible. The Japanese snipers died confused, never understanding how American bullets had curved through jungle to strike from directions their training insisted were secure. The pinned platoon advanced successfully. 0 additional American casualties occurred that day in that sector. Captain Yamamoto received the report that evening, and for the first time in his military career felt genuine fear. The Americans had broken the tactical stalemate not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through creative thinking that Japanese hierarchical doctrine couldn't replicate or counter. The war, he realized with sinking certainty, might not end the way Tokyo insisted it would. Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, September 2nd, 1945. 3 days after Japan's formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri, Corporal James Dalton, now Gunnery Sergeant James Dalton, decorated with the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and a Purple Heart from Okinawa shrapnel, stood before 43 Marine Corps sniper instructors and delivered a lecture that would fundamentally transform American military doctrine for the next 80 years. The room was silent, except for the scratch of pencils on paper, as career military officers documented techniques developed by a hardware store owner's son who had refused to accept conventional wisdom. The statistics were irrefutable. The angular ricochet method, officially designated as Indirect Trajectory Engagement Protocol by Marine Corps documentation, had accounted for 347 confirmed enemy eliminations during the Pacific campaign. Casualty rates in sectors where the technique was implemented dropped by an average of 68%. Counter-sniper operation time decreased from 51.3 hours to 7.2 hours average. Most significantly, the technique had been successfully taught to 126 Marines across 17 different units, proving that innovation could be systematized and transmitted through proper training protocols. But the impact extended far beyond immediate combat effectiveness. The psychological effect on Japanese sniper operations had been devastating and unexpected. Intelligence reports, now available after surrender, revealed that Japanese field commanders had issued increasingly desperate orders about American geometric weapons that their soldiers couldn't understand or counter. Sniper deployment rates had decreased 43% in the war's final year, specifically due to fear of techniques that violated traditional positional security. The innovation had achieved strategic impact through tactical application, exactly the kind of force multiplication that modern warfare demanded. Colonel Harrison, now General Harrison, and appointed to Marine Corps Development Command, spoke with uncharacteristic emotion during the closing ceremony. "Gentlemen," he told the assembled officers, "I initially dismissed Corporal Dalton's ideas as carnival tricks. I was wrong. This young man demonstrated something fundamental about American military strength. We innovate when innovation is necessary. We adapt when adaptation saves lives. And we embrace creative solutions even when they challenge traditional doctrine. That flexibility, that willingness to question conventional wisdom, will define American military superiority for generations." Jimmy himself returned to Millbrook, married his high school sweetheart Sarah, took over his father's hardware store, and rarely spoke about the war, except to occasional groups of veterans who understood what silence meant. He received formal recognition in 1963 when the Marine Corps officially incorporated Ricochet trajectory training into advanced sniper curriculum, acknowledging that his carnival tricks had become standard doctrine. By then, his technique had been refined with laser rangefinders, computer-calculated trajectories, and materials science developments he could never have imagined in the Guadalcanal mud. The human cost, however, remained impossible to calculate precisely. The 43 Marines whose lives Jimmy saved that first day on Guadalcanal returned home to families, careers, children who would never have existed otherwise. Mathematicians estimated that the technique's implementation prevented between 2,100 and 2,800 American casualties throughout the Pacific campaign, each representing individual futures, families, possibilities. When Lieutenant Chen, who became a professor of military history at Stanford after the war, attempted to quantify the legacy, he concluded simply, "Innovation measured in lives saved is the only mathematics that truly matters." The broader lesson transcended military application. Jimmy's story became case study material at West Point and Naval Academy, taught not as tactical instruction, but as organizational philosophy. Hierarchies that cannot accommodate innovation from unexpected sources become brittle and vulnerable. Rigid doctrine that cannot adapt to creative thinking loses wars despite material superiority. Individuals willing to challenge conventional wisdom, politely but persistently, drive progress that bureaucracies alone cannot achieve. By 1985, when Jimmy passed away at age 66 from heart disease, the Marine Corps had trained over 15,000 snipers in techniques descended directly from his wartime improvisation. The angular ricochet method had been adapted for urban warfare, adapted again for desert operations, refined through computer modeling, and ultimately recognized as fundamental sniper doctrine rather than experimental tactic. Military historians trace direct lineage from his corrugated steel panels in Guadalcanal mud to sophisticated targeting systems used in modern special operations. But perhaps the most profound legacy was cultural rather than tactical. Jimmy's story validated something fundamentally American: the belief that ordinary people confronting extraordinary challenges can develop solutions that expertise alone cannot provide. That innovation emerges from necessity when bureaucracy permits experimentation, that the kid from a small-town hardware store might solve problems that military academies insist are unsolvable. His rifle, battered and customized with hand-etched calculations, now rests in the Marine Corps Museum at Quantico, a reminder that warfare's most effective innovations sometimes come from asking the simplest question: what if there's a better way? 3 generations later, Marine Corps recruiters still tell his story to young men and women considering service. They explain how one soldier refused to accept that impossible meant impossible forever. They describe how innovation under pressure saved thousands of lives. They emphasize that military strength comes not just from equipment or training, but from cultural willingness to embrace creative solutions when traditional methods fail. And they conclude with the line that has become unofficial Marine Corps philosophy: improvise, adapt, overcome. Just like Corporal Dalton did when he taught bullets how to turn corners. The Japanese snipers who died on Guadalcanal never understood what killed them: bullets that curved through jungle, striking from angles their training insisted were impossible. In that confusion lies the lesson. Wars are won not by those who follow doctrine most rigidly, but by those who adapt doctrine most creatively when circumstances demand. Jimmy Dalton understood that intuitively in 1942, and the Marine Corps has been teaching it formally ever since. If this story of American ingenuity under impossible odds inspired you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because history's most incredible moments deserve to be remembered and shared. Drop a comment telling us, what other unknown World War II innovations should we explore? Which forgotten heroes deserve recognition? Your suggestions drive our content, and your engagement keeps these stories alive for future generations. Share this video with anyone who believes that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when courage meets creativity. Remember, innovation doesn't require permission, it requires determination. Subscribe now, and let's uncover more hidden history together.